Alright, hey everybody. This is going to be a rules video for Arc Minima. Arc Minima is my 18 card version of Arc Nova. We're going to go through how to learn the two-player game in this video. This is my rulebook. That is just for me to reference if needed. This is the first player marker. You don't necessarily need that, and we won't need this for this video because that is for the solo bot. Otherwise, the rest of the components are 16 animal cards and 2 action cards. The goal of Arc Minima is to build the zoo that is worth the most points, and you'll get points from 2 different places, well, 2 main places. One is for every animal that is out in your zoo, you get what's called a peel. That's victory points at the end of the game. And for every conserved animal, you also get their conservation value. And that happens if the animal is tilted left or conserved at the end of the game. Some animals also have scoring abilities indicated by the brown dot, and those just do what they say and can get you extra points at the end of the game. Why don't we quickly go through the anatomy of a card? This is called an animal card. It has a lot of different uses. This top portion here, so ignoring these portions, all of this has to do with the animal. So this is the animal that you're putting out in your zoo when you're building out your tableau. Over here are some requirements. Along this left side, actually, there's an enclosure size and a money requirement, as well as possibly some icon requirements. That's enclosure size, that's the money cost to play the animal. This is actually the discard value, so if I discard this card, I can use that 6 money as payment for something else. And some of the larger animals, like the bear, will have icons that are a requirement to play. So you have to have these out in your zoo already. You have to have 2 predator icons out in your zoo to play that bear out. This lightning bolt indicates it's a starter card. There's 6 of them. Here are the icons that the animal provides. There are 3 different animal types: predators, birds, and herbivores. And then there's 3 different continents. There's Europe, Africa, and North America. The animal might provide either water or rocks. So this wolf provides water. This flamingo provides rocks, and the bear doesn't provide water or rocks. This is the money provided. So when this animal is out in your zoo and it's ready, it can be spent. Tilted right is the ready position. I can spend that animal to accomplish something else, to pay a cost for something else. The ones with the coffee cup icons give you income at a break, and I'll give you an explanation of that later. Here is the animal's ability. Here's just the name. Here's the ability. This might be an effect that triggers as soon as you play the card, or on some other condition, or it might be a scoring ability like we talked about. This blue section is the sponsor action. This is the strength requirement. We'll go through that. That's action's name. And this is what it does. Some of these are going to be marked up. This is still a prototype copy. This green section over here is a conservation action. I will go into detail on what those mean later. Let's go through setup. Give each player an action card. We'll just set up player 2 over there so that we can keep everything in screen here. So we'll set up just for us. Here's the action card, by the way. It has 4 different action spaces: sponsorvation, animals, build, and cards. You place that out in front of you. I like to place it off to the side so I have room for my tableau here. For setup, give each player 2 starter cards randomly. So take the 6 starter cards, shuffle them up, deal 2 to each player, and then shuffle the non-starter cards, the ones that don't have the lightning bolt, and deal 2 more to each player. Then you're going to do an initial draft to get your starting hand of 3 cards. So I can keep one of these cards and I pass the other 3. Then I take their remaining 3 cards, I keep another one, pass the other 2, and then I keep one final one, and the remaining card that didn't get chosen by each player gets shuffled back into the deck. So we're each going to have 3 cards at the start of the game. This information is hidden, you don't have to show your opponent. Then we'll shuffle up the deck, and we will set it to round 1. The round is tracked here with the Roman numerals. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's going to be 4 rounds in the game. We'll set it to round 1. There's going to be a display that forms. A display is also the discard pile. And let's go through that now. So through the course of the game, you're going to end up discarding cards through different effects. If there are 2 display piles or 2 discard piles, if there's any empty spaces, if like there's only, let's say that there's a discard pile like that, that means there's an empty space here. The next card that anyone discards, they have to fill in that space. And then the rest of the cards, you can choose to, like say I was discarding all 3 of these cards, I could put one here and the other one here. So you can distribute those as you want. And that's setup. That's actually everything that you need to do for setup. So let's go through all of the actions in order, or in a certain order here. And I think what makes the most logical sense is we'll do cards and then build and then animals. To take an action, you have to manage your action card. Out here on you'll set it out here on the table, and there's a concept called strength, and strength depends on the strength of the action depends on the position the action is in. So you can see there's like north, east, south, and west here. Top or north is strength 4, 3, 2, and 1. And the actions tell you what they do right on the card here. So the card's action lets you draw cards or snap. Snapping is basically drafting. I'll get to that in just 1 second. But you can see the effectiveness of the action depends on the strength. So there's a little table here that's strength 1, 2, 3, 4. If the card's action was in this position, which means it's at strength 4, I get to draw 2 cards. If it was, let's say here, I could still take the card's action, but it would be strength 3, which means I would draw 2 and return 1. Returning means putting it back to the bottom of the deck. You don't discard sometimes. Sometimes the game will instruct you to return instead. And then all the way down to, at strength 1, you draw 1 card and return 1. Okay, that's pretty easy. After you take an action on your card, you rotate it so that it is on the left side, or the weakest strength, strength 1. I should mention so that on your turn, you take 1 action and you just go back and forth. There's no real turn structure other than that. 1 second here. Sorry about that. You may have heard my cat was wanting to get out of the room. There is a round structure, and I'll get to that, but the turn structure is just you go back and forth taking actions, and you take 1 action on your turn. So if I did cards, I'd rotate that, I would grab my cards, and that would be my turn. It would move to the next player. Let's go through the build action. So your animals are going to have to go into enclosures. So the build action allows you to build 1 building with a maximum size of X, X meaning the strength of the build action that you're taking. And you have to pay 2 money per space, or per size of that enclosure. The enclosures are on the back of the cards. So let's just do an example here. Let's say my build action is on strength 2, since it's in that bottom or south position. We'll rotate it briefly so we can read it. If I want to build a size 2 enclosure, I would have to pay 2 money per size, so that would be 4 money total. So I'm going to generate that by discarding this card because I want that 4 money. So I can discard, if you remember, the discard value of the card is right here in the smaller number. I'm going to discard that to generate 4 money and then build an enclosure of size 2. You take that enclosure from the top of the deck, you keep the card face down, you don't get to look at it, and you rotate it. You can see the enclosure sizes are on the back of the card here. You rotate it to the appropriate size, mine is size 2, and it goes right there. Now, one concept I haven't mentioned yet is your tableau or your zoo is an invisible 3x3 grid, and the first structure or animal that you put out has to be in the bottom left corner. So the rules for placing enclosures are they have to be either in the bottom left corner for your first enclosure or adjacent to an existing enclosure or animal. So let's say I had that enclosure there, I had an animal here, and I had another enclosure there. I could, if I wanted to, just build another enclosure over here. It doesn't have to be adjacent to an animal. It can be just adjacent to another enclosure. Okay, so that would have been me getting my enclosure out. I would take my action card and rotate so that the build action is over here on the left at strength 1. You don't have to build the maximum size possible, so even if my build action was on strength 4, I don't have to build a size 4 enclosure. I could build a size 2 and just pay that cost and still rotate it. Okay, once I have an enclosure out, let's say I have that size 2 enclosure out, I'm going to take this card back so that I can put it out in that enclosure. I have my size 2 enclosure out. It's my turn again, and I want to play an animal out into that enclosure. I would have to take the... Sorry, backing up a little bit, I never did explain snapping, did I? Oh, I'm sorry, this is out of order. Snapping is when you take the card's action. If it's on strength 4, it means you can grab the top card from either of the displays, and you take that into your hand. Sorry about that. We'll go back to the animal's action. So this depends on your strength as well. If it's on strength 1, over here on the left, you actually can't play an animal. If it's on strength 4, up here on top, you could play 2 animals if you wanted, and you would have to have an enclosure for each of the animals that you're playing out. So let's say my animal's action is actually, I don't know, down here on strength 2, which means I can play an animal. I have a size 2 enclosure already, and this is probably the most complex of the actions because there's a lot going on and a lot of requirements you have to think about. So after the start of the game, this lightning bolt means nothing. It's just to remind you of which are the starter cards. When I'm playing this out, this section over here is the requirements, and you can ignore the money, the discard value. You're only concerned about the money cost there. So this raccoon needs at least a size 1 enclosure. Well, we have a size 2, so that works. And we need to generate 11 money. Well, can we do that? Yeah, because I have 8 and 5, and that's more than 11. So I could discard both of these cards. Let's say I put one there and there. I generated enough money, and I have the proper enclosure size, and I took my animal's action. So I get to place it out in this enclosure. It replaces the enclosure, and that enclosure, without looking at it, goes on the bottom of the deck. And when the card goes out, when you play an animal into your zoo, it immediately starts in what's called the ready position. So here is called the spent position, just upright. This is ready, and this is conserved. The reason that a ready position is important is because it's ready to be spent. You can think of it that way. The money provided, I can use this 6 money on a future action, such as playing an animal or building an enclosure, and I can spend this card to help pay for that action. So let's say it's my turn again, and I wanted to take the build action, and I wanted a size 3 enclosure. So I would rotate my card to take that build action, and I don't even have to discard cards from my hand. I can spend it all from the 6, and I have my size 3 enclosure. We'll get to the concept of breaks later, but some animals have a coffee cup icon. Sorry about that. And some animals do not on their money provided. The ones with the coffee cup icons, actually ready themselves at each break. And I'll go through the break in a minute, but those are nice because you get that income recurring. Usually it's a smaller amount to make up for it. Some of these larger animals, or just any of the animals, might have a larger money value, but would require, they don't ready themselves at a break. Let's talk through requirements. We mentioned this briefly, but you can see along this left side, this line has a predator icon. That means you need to already have a predator icon in your zoo. So you look at the icons provided by animals in your zoo. Here's a bear. That's a fourth animal type. It doesn't really key off of anything in this game, but it might be useful when it comes to conservation actions, which I'll explain later. But you can see that this raccoon provides predator icon. So if I had my raccoon out, I would legally be able to play this lion out, at least in terms of I have one predator icon already in my zoo. Some animals have rock or water requirements. That just means that this lion needs to be placed adjacent to, so orthogonally, north, south, east, or west, not diagonally. It needs to be placed adjacent to an animal that provides rocks or water. You can see this raccoon provides rocks, so this lion could legally be placed there or placed here. Let's see, what else with requirements? This doesn't have to be an animal type. It could end up being a continent type. So this one says I need to have a North America icon out. After you play the animal, immediately after playing the animal and rotating your action card, then you get to carry out the ability. If it doesn't say that it's a scoring ability, which is only really important at the end of the game, it's just an effect that you get to trigger right away or on whatever condition it states. So this one, clearly you get right away. It says gain 1 X token or draw 1 card. So I would play that out, and let's say I choose to draw a card. That just means from the deck I get to take that card into my hand right after playing that animal, and then that ends my turn. The X tokens, probably a good time to talk about those. There's two ways to have X tokens. So there is, some of the animals have this little X above their money provided. You can discard that card for an X token, and then your action card can be, through a method I'll tell you about in 1 second, can be flipped to its purple side, and then you can flip that back to its blue side in order to spend an X token. What X tokens do is they boost the strength of your action for every X token spent. So let's say I was on strength 3 for my cards action, but I really wanted a strength 4 version of that action, or say I really wanted to snap, and it needs to be on strength 4 to snap. If I discarded this lion from my hand, I could boost that by 1, and it's as if I took a strength 4 cards action. Or likewise, if my card was on the purple side, you can see I have my X token here. I could take the cards action and flip my card to take a strength 4 cards action. You'll notice one thing is some animals have a size 5 enclosure requirement. The only way to get that is to actually boost your build action up to a 5, because it can only get up to 4 just organically on its own in the strength 4 position. How do you get your action card to the strength token side or the X token side? It's an action called passing. So this is one of the actions that is not actually on your action card. For your turn as your action, you can choose to simply pass, which means to rotate your card 1 or 2 spaces to the left. So 1, 2, and then flip the card. And that's your entire turn. Sometimes it's a good way to get out the action that you need to get out, and or gain a strength token, which is valuable on later turns. I believe we covered everything for the animals, actually. So let's move to the sponsor actions. You take those by taking a sponsorvation action. So this says play 1 sponsor's action with a max level of whatever strength the action is, or 1 conservation action if at strength 4. So we'll go over the sponsor's action first. The sponsorvation is just like a play on words because it's a combination sponsor conservation action. If you've played big Arc Nova, you'll know that those are actually two separate action cards in that game. Let's do an easier one here. So this is actually an easy one. Say I want to take this sponsor's action. It's at strength 3. It's called the Science Library, and it says discard a card from your hand to take both cards in the display. So let's say I don't like my hand. I like those two cards a lot. I could, as long as my sponsorvation action space was on strength 3 or higher, so here is strength 3, I could rotate that, take that action, and then I play this card or I discard this card because I used it for its sponsor action. So if you use a card for its sponsor action, you discard it. So I would discard this card, but it also says if I discard another card from my hand, I can take both cards in the display. So this happens before you actually put the cards on top of those cards. So I would say, okay, I'm playing that for the sponsor action, and I'm going to discard that one. I'm going to take both these cards from the display, and then go ahead and put these in their proper place in the pile. So now this is my new hand. There are various different types of sponsor actions, like this is spend a large animal to ready or conserve any 2 small animals. These got the most treatment lately, so these are the most marked up. This is searching the discard to get a new card in your hand. So there's a few different things. You can just keep an eye on those to see if any are going to be useful for you. You might even draft a card or snap a card, in order to get a sponsor action that you find valuable. Those are sponsor actions. Let's go to conservation actions. These you'll probably end up doing later in the game, and it's a way to sort of turn your engine into victory points rather than an engine. This is the green section over here. And what a conservation action includes is that central part there is the type of, it's basically cash in on conservation points, also known as victory points, by playing this card because you have the proper set in your zoo. So this one is, you can see all the different animal type icons. This is have at least 2 different animal types in your zoo. So let's pretend we're doing that. Say I have these 2 cards out. I have a bird and a herbivore. So I meet that requirement. I have 2 different animal icons. That means if I play this card, discard it as part of the conservation action, I've generated 6 conservation points. You have to store that somehow, and how you store that is by, this math works out. How you store that is by conserving animals in your zoo. So you can see porcupine has conservation value of 2. The flamingo has a conservation value of 4. I generated 6 conservation points, so I get to conserve up to 6 conservation points in my zoo, mixing and matching as needed. Even if one of these was, say that porcupine was readied, I can still conserve it and just kind of give up on that money or whatever. Maybe it's near the end of the game and I don't really have a use for that money. So that's one way to take a conservation action, is by playing a card from your hand. The other way to take a conservation action is to actually take the conservation action of a card in your zoo. And this is a little bit more complicated, but it's really not too bad. So you can see this porcupine has a requirement of you need at least 2 different continent types, and then it would generate 6 conservation points. We actually have that. So let's say we wanted to do that. So I took my conservation action because this was on strength 4. So I'm going to rotate that, and I'm going to choose not to take the conservation action of a card in my hand. I'm going to take this one. I can take this, but if I take this action, let's say I take that action and I store it on this flamingo, then I would have to discard this card from my zoo and it would go over here. Alternatively, you can prevent that discarding by spending money equal to the money cost of the card that you took the conservation action of. So that's the most confusing part, I promise. So let's say I want to take this action and I don't want to discard that card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay money in order to keep this card and not have to discard it from my zoo. So I'm going to have to pay 8 money. I'm guessing I can generate it from here. So I'm going to discard these 2 cards. and then I can store these 6 conservation points out in my zoo. You actually have to start with the card that you use the conservation action of. And the reason for that is you can only take the conservation action of cards in your zoo that are not already conserved. And that's to prevent you from just spamming a really good conservation action over and over. So I've done this. I no longer could take this conservation action or this one. If you, I forgot to mention this, if you take the conservation action of a card from your hand, when you discard it, you have to do what's called exhaust it. And that means either tilt it this way or this way, 90 degrees right or left. The players just agree which one applies to them. And the reason you have to do that, so let's just say when I exhaust cards, I put them this way, and I'm going to put it on top of one of the discard piles. That is to indicate that I do not get to snap that card or draft it from the discard, even with a different card effect like a sponsor action. And that is also to prevent me from, let's say this is a really good conservation action for my tableau. That's to prevent me from like playing that conservation action, snapping it back and playing it again and just spamming that combo over and over. But since this was rotated my way, or the way that I exhaust cards, it means I can't snap that card, but my opponent could. Likewise, let's say my opponent also just did a conservation action and they played theirs like that. I could draft this card or I could snap that card, but they can't. But I can't snap my own card that I just played back. Let's see. We have to be getting close here. The only other action that I haven't mentioned is discarding cards. So if you want, you can spend your entire turn, you can use your whole action to just discard your hand. Say I have these 3 cards in my hand, I would just discard those. That's my entire turn. That does not change your action card at all. So nothing happens with my action card, I just discard cards. The reason that might end up happening is you might find yourself just wanting to rush the end game, and that's a really inefficient way to do it, but just to make sure that nobody ever gets stuck, that's your way to rush the end game. So to recap on the actions, animals is how you play animals into enclosures. You have to spend money equal to their cost and meet all of their icon requirements and the enclosure size. Build is how you build enclosures. You grab something from the top of the deck and you pay the cost. Cards is how you get cards from the deck or snap if you're on strength 4. Sponsorvation allows you to play a card from your hand for its sponsor's action or to play a conservation action, and that can come from your hand or can come from your tableau. Just remember those special rules about playing it from your tableau. The other action is passing, so I can rotate my card 1 or 2 counterclockwise, and then I get to flip the card. I can spend this X token later to boost the strength of my action by 1. And then the other action we just discussed is discarding my hand as my turn. Scoring. So you'll likely have some combination of animals like this. Likely some will be conserved, some will not, and you might even have an empty enclosure out here. So to score, total up the appeal points. So this is the number in the ticket over here. Score up the appeal points on every one of your cards, and then total up, and then add to it the conservation points on cards that are tilted left or that have been conserved. Total those into one big number, and then also add any scoring abilities. Like this wolf gives you 3 extra points for every bird that the wolf is adjacent to. We wouldn't get any for that one. And then finally subtract 2 points for every empty enclosure, and then compare your score, and whoever has the most points wins. I think that's it. If I missed anything, I'll try to address it in the comments. Just let me know. But otherwise, I hope you guys enjoy the game.